Yeah, so that is so Mongolia is quite it has quite different landscapes and nature types, and that's what I'm going to walk you through tonight because it's very different. And just to explain a little bit about Mongolia, so you have the blue areas here is where the Mongolians live, the ethnic Mongolians. Then you have the Buryats, which is kind of a native Siberian my Mongolians, they call them Buryat. And then you have Tuva people, which are a Turkic people, and you have the Cossacks all the way in the west where we live. So and they actually speak quite the sea here is it's actually not related to the languages around. So it's quite an interesting people in that way. And maybe the closest relatives are around north. So it's quite an interesting place. And the language sounds quite interesting. And so on. It gets really, really warm at 400 meters altitude. And we had 56 degrees, 0.3 outside one day during summer. And in winter, it gets really cold. Here it's minus 45 degrees Celsius. And that's when the diesel trucks have a really hard time running because it's so cold. And even here you can see it's called the red mantled rosefinch freezing in the feathers on top of the head of this bird. And they come down to our local sea buckthorn plantation during winter. Otherwise, quite a nice bird. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about the capital, Ulaanbaatar, and the birds around there. We lived in UB, as we call it, for a year. Here you have the Tulgul, and there's some really nice riparian forests there. And I used to take my bike out there because there's a lot of traffic jam. So biking around is easy. Really nice bird like the Acer tit is really common around there, where they breed in the riparian forest. It's just a bird that's absolutely one of my favorite birds, ever. We also have the azure-winged magpie, which breeds in there, now split from the birds in Iberia. And both the azure-tit and the azure-winged magpie stay all year round in Mongolia, so they're hardy birds. You see one collecting nest material. And which are actually open also during winter, and they're really, really good for birding. There's a small breeding population of swan geese around the UB sewage ponds. A nice, fascinating bird. I even found that quite rare to see in UB, which is pretty much in the center of Mongolia, whereas the Baikal seals are easier to see way to the east in eastern Mongolia. And you also have the eastern spot-billed duck. So UB has really an eastern feeling to it. Mandarin ducks have also started to breed in the riparian forest for the last 10 years, maybe, which is really interesting because it's on there. And it's also really nice because they seem to do rather bad in Southeast Asia as a whole. But now there are several pairs in the riparian forest around. You can see a lot of cool stuff. For instance, this white thrush, which is just in the center of UB. There's a small 10 minutes from home, so I used to check it every morning, and it's just big enough to get quite a few migrants and to keep them around, and small enough so it's actually possible to view the black-throated thrushes, or well, you could call it thrush nightmares, because here you have a black-throated thrush, but it's here a nice clean black-throated thrush, even though the red-throated here is much more common in UB. Whereas here in Hoft in the west, the black-throated is much more common. But in every flock, you see quite a few birds. Red-throated thrush is quite a nice one. They even winter in some areas around UB, so quite a hardy bird. And of course, you have the Siberian thrush, which is less common, but you can also be shy and hard to work with. Here is a nice female. And especially during winter, we also get the occasional Palace's rosefinch that winters along the Tool River. And it's also just nice outside of Mongolia, as far as I've heard. And they start together in March, where you can see flocks of several hundreds. So quite a nice bird. And then you sometimes find that rare in the UB area. And here's a quail, common quail, which also landed in the park and just showed ridiculously well. So I was quite happy about that, which is unfortunately not doing really well due to overgrazing in many parts of Mongolia. Is still hanging on in good numbers in UB, where they especially like the area just along the the Trans-Siberian Railway because there are a lot of shrubberies just along the rail line. Here you can actually see it running along the Trans-Siberian rail line. Well, it departs in Russia, where one goes to Vladivostok and one route goes to the UB. And that maybe has saved the Dorian partridges because there are some few areas that are not being grazed. And so nice to get good views of those. During migration, you get all sorts of nice birds. This quite dark-backed citron whitetail is one of them. I've never seen it quite black here in Mongolia. Here's a nice gray-backed male citron whitetail. And of course, the dreambird, Swendell dreambirds, the Siberian ruby-throat, is quite common. And in a good fall in May, you might find 20, 30 of these just in the city park. And again, just not enough coverage from them to keep away from the camera all the time. So it's really nice. Here's another one that's splendid bird, really. Yeah, and a third one just to have you going out. One is present in Sweden now singing, so maybe one is gonna winter in Wales somewhere, just like one did in Holland a few years ago. And it's also interesting that we have a lot of both ravens, but also birds like the eagle owl are actually using the construction sites to both to nest and to fly around. Because many construction made, then they stop and then they build again. So you can actually see the eagle owls even in the city center. And yeah, you get migrants like this quite interesting looking Taiga flycatcher with some red. It's a nice bird. The occasional Balin's crake also turns up in the UB city center. Some beautiful blue butterflies that I don't know anything about, except they look good. And you even have a corsac. During migration, you see a lot of Pacific swifts like this one, especially at the sewage ponds. And you can see thousands and thousands in a day. So it's also find the local rarity like a stockdow, and that's really quite a rare bird for UB. I think there are a few records only. Nice looking birds, probably the nominate subspecies. And the yellow-breasted, just around a small area in the UB ponds, we have at least 3 different breeding pairs. So at least around UB, it seems to do quite well. Quite a charming and beautiful bird, and of course, a dream bird when watching migrants in Western Europe. Here it's just singing in UB within the city center. So that's quite nice. We also have quite a few pairs of Amur falcons breeding just it's a Songun area where you have several pairs of Amur falcons. Japanese buzzards are also quite common around during the summer. And when you're lucky, you can find the nice and actually quite dangerous, quite rare bird. Here you can see it right next to an eastern black-tailed godwit in a tank stint. And this is also at the UB sewage ponds. So the sewage ponds are quite nice for birding, really. Nice looking dawicha. Now we're going to go to the mountains. And the highest mountains are in the southwest, in the Altai Mountains. You can see the blue color on the map stretches there. And then you have the Hanga west central Mongolia. And here you see a typical Altai looking landscape. It's from the Jargal and Kharkhanul, just close to Hoft where I live. And the highest peaks are, and most of the Altai are just completely, without trees and only really sparse vegetation in the valleys. Really nice place and quite a few things that you can see in the mountains. Here you see the Argali sheep, the subspecies in the Altai Mountains is really large, and you can see the rams here. They're just. And some suggest that the Argali sheep are actually the forefathers of our own native sheep. Nice looking animals, really. And in the mountains, you'll find these ovals on the tops of the mountains where the Mongolians go twice a year to snap off an Argali sheep skull here on top of the oval. They go there to pray and to ask the good spirits to protect them against the evil spirit. If you pay attention, you can see feathers from the eagle owls inside these feathers, and it's a shamanism where especially feathers from owls, great gray owls, Ural owls, but also eagle eye, both owl feathers and claws that they use for all kinds of rituals, which means that hunting for owls is quite popular, unfortunately. Through mountain speed, which is quite common on mountain lakes in Mongolia, and they're reported to fly even over the summit of Mount Everest. So it's one of the highest flying birds in the world from some park in Holland, even though there's a small feral population as far as I know in Europe. And in the mountains, you also find all of these different mountain finches. Here's a picture during the winter in order to forage. And there are many different species, Asian rosy finches, Brandt's finches, and many others that you can find in the. And you have the Altai falcons, which are, well, they don't really know what it is, if it's just a sacred falcon or if it's some kind of hybrid or intermediate population between gyr falcon. But at least they're quite common. And, well, sacred falcons generally are just quite common in Mongolia, but nice to look at, really nice to look at. Here, the snow-capped mountains where they forage, which is, well, I think there are less than 10 records, but you find them in the mountain slopes on where you have scattered trees. Here's the pale-backed, most common at least in Western Mongolia. And when you're lucky, I've once managed to photograph a wolf. Here it's very distant, but wolves are really quite common in Mongolia, and I've heard that maybe 10,000 wolves are being hunted each year. In the mountains, you also have the Gültenstads, red starts, and they're really quite common and easy to come by when you get up in the right altitude. And they show just really well. It's also called white-winged red start for obvious reasons. And I've been trying to look out for the snow leopard, right, from Calvin Klein should attract them, and we tried to spray it on some rocks up in the mountains, but it didn't succeed. But we got to see Ulaanbaatar. Maybe Mongolia is the best place to see that species in the world because it's really quite common. And they breed in different places, even just half an hour from where we live. So it's quite a nice species to have around here. And sometimes you find the real rarity like this pied flycatcher, exciting to us as it is to local Mongolian birds, but it's quite a good bird here in Mongolia. We also have the red fox here, which is quite common. Rufous-tailed rock thrush is also quite common. You can easily see in the mountains. You see the males with really long horns, looking nice. We've been visiting some herders out in the Jargaland Mountains during winter, because in winter they can cut big chunks of ice. Otherwise, it's so dry, it's impossible to live out in the mountains during summer. Of course, they can't afford to have of course, there are no paved road out there in the mountains, but this guy is herding out there, and he has goats and sheep, and he sees the snow leopard pretty much every 2 weeks or so. Quite some livestock too, both wolves and two snow leopards. And his wife was outside one winter a few years ago, and she needed to she took this picture with her snow leopard move away, because they just leave their winter storage with all the meat outside on like a small platform, because it obviously just freezes, and then they take what they need, and sometimes the snow steal off some food, so they need to chase them off. Quite an impressive picture of snow leopard with a cheap cell phone, I must admit. We also had the gray-necked bunting breeding in the mountains there, and of course, really nice charming bird, almost like a husky warbler, just with a really obvious yellow eyebrow, especially in front of the eye. But that's kidding. Well, it's recorded now in the UK, Denmark, so who knows if it turns up on Skomer Island someday. Then we have Eastern Mongolia, which is quite a different story. Eastern Mongolia is quite not so explored. A few years to the east, to the red dot there, which is called Burnur, and we also went further east on an expedition. Here you have the German guys, and I am just left of the parking sign, birds, and we also did some mist netting, and yeah, it was just really awesome. Here you have the eastern plains of Mongolia. You don't have a lot of people there. Generally, you don't have a lot of people in Mongolia. It's actually the least populated state, with about 2.5 people per square kilometer. And half the population lives in the capital, and you have 2 people per square kilometer. So they're just vast areas of nothing, well, of no people at least. And no livestock, so the grass looks the Boernur in the east, just a lot of space for a lot of birds. And we drove around in these Russian furgons, much like the old foothills. They can get through anything, because there are no roads out here, so you're just driving on tracks and gravel. Mongolians like to wrestle every now and then, but it's quite a lot of cover, especially in the riparian forests where the birds tend to stay on. I found one really nice bird. This is Baikal bush warbler. Not a very known species. It's also records of those in Mongolia at all. It's like a small locustella, though it's closely related to the locustellas. And I wonder what you would do if you found one of those. There's with the plain breast and the plain undertail coats, it's the Chinese bush warbler. And they seem to migrate in the same way as the Pallas's grasshopper warblers. So why not find one in Western Europe? Really skittish bird, just runs away in the grass rather than flying. And we caught a few in the nets, so we got to take measurements and ring a few of those. Yeah, nice looking, but really, really skittish. Here's Pallas's grasshopper, especially in the east. They're really, really common. We also got to see quite a few shorebirds like curlew sandpipers, and this great nut was actually only but on the trip we actually found 3 different birds. They're probably regular in eastern Mongolia. Gray-headed lapwing is also breeding in eastern Mongolia. The population was found maybe 10 years or so ago, but there are a few pairs and see them going through post-breeding molt. The gray-tailed tattler is also quite common, actually all the way to UB, and then further east. There are records from Sweden, at least. I don't know if it has been seen in the UK, but quite a Taiga species. And lesser sampler is quite common. And one feature at least is quite nice, and it's the little curlews. There are flocks of really, really nice birds, little curlews. And yeah, they just tend to, they gather after the breeding season around the Lake Boernur. Huge chunk of the world population, I think. A nice, beautiful bird. Really, really rare. Long-toed throughout Europe, throughout Mongolia, even though it's not so common in the west. And the eastern cattle egret you find every now and then also in Mongolia. And one of the really, really, really interesting birds, it's the northern parrotbill. And it only breeds in northeastern China. Maybe it goes a little bit into Russia also, but we managed to find a single one of those on our trip in August. Beautiful, really special bird. And yeah, the app for horses here, you have a Mongolian herdsman who really knows how to ride a horse. And this is how it looks in August, just meadows and tall grass and really nice, unspoiled. And some of the grass actually is more than seen. But there are a lot of mosquitoes. You basically need to cover your whole body with something that the mosquitoes are not able to bite through. Otherwise, you're going to get stung. To find this beautiful flycatcher, the Mugimaki flycatcher, a juvenile, probably male, which has only been recorded a few times in Mongolia, but it has turned up even in Norway, so it's also a potential bottom. Really nice looking flycatcher, roughly the size of red-breasted flycatcher, I think. Great bustards are breeding in the area as well. And here's a brown nightjar, which you can also find in loaded rock thrush, which is also quite rare in Mongolia, maybe just unrecorded, the juvenile that I found near Haltgun, which is one of the easternmost cities. You sweet hamsters around. And the occasional Huklin skull, along with the Mongolian gulls. Large gulls here are quite confusing, but still interesting, quite a challenge. Japanese quails are common in the east, flushing a few of them. Japanese reed bunting as well is breeding in eastern Mongolia. Here, I think it's a juvenile male. And of course, you have quite some Russian communist, since it was a Russian or vassal state until communism fell. And here you have a, remembrance of Lenin, and it was even put up in 2014 in the Battle of Haltgul against the Chinese, the Manchurians, and the Japanese. So quite interesting. You see a monument for the brave war Russian tanks and Mongolian forces fighting off the Japanese. More mosquitoes in the east. There are just so many mosquitoes. Yeah, and this is what the camp looks like. This is what I imagine, London looked like before people came, or the great European rivers and deltas, just with a lot of grass, a lot of trees, riparian forest, just really unspoiled and really, really nice. You have the taiga, which is the largest salmon species in the world, and it can grow longer than 2 meters, so quite nice. And I even managed to. And in these areas, these large plains, you have millions of Mongolian gazelles, and it's quite a nice ecosystem to see all of the wild livestock just thriving. And some of the birds breeding there are maybe the most beautiful harrier in the world, the pied harrier, which is not common, but it breeds in the general area. Sacred falcons, strong, nice looking bird. And buntings, a nice yellow-browed bunting here. Saw quite a few of those. Palace's grasshopper warbler just flushed and flying away. Pretty hard to photograph though. Siberian ruby throats, grease, stone chats, looking really nice. And the occasional marble polecat that you see out in the steppe there. You can just see all the grass, how beautiful it is also. And then we found out some quite interesting stuff, because the field guides will tell you when you look at the juvenile Taiga flycatcher, of course, you should check for the. Also have the perception that it's supposed to be a really cold, almost lead gray bird. But many of the juveniles that we found were actually really warm brown like this one. So you cannot just judge grayish or if it's more warm colored, because this is more a typical color of a red-breasted flycatcher, but note the black upper tail coverts and also the peer. Yeah, and it's really quite common around. And then there's the thick-billed warbler, which is also quite common from UB into the east. I've even seen it all the way here in the west also. It's almost like a babbler to look at. Two-barred greenish warblers are common, really common, and whereas the wood warbler is quite rare in Mongolia, but I've seen a few of those now. Really a beautiful bunting. And here is just the flushed brown or eastern water rails. It's called. Participant Andreas Burkheim, one of the German scientists, he was walking on his own and he flushed this yellow-legged bottom quail, which is the first record of a bird seen alive in Mongolia. We tried to. He was really good that he managed to get photographs of this really small, skittish bird. Now we're going to go to the Gobi Desert, which is east. As you can see, the Gobi Desert stretches along the southwestern area, and rain a year. Some years it doesn't rain at all. And it has a quite interesting ecosystem because a lot of the plants, can just stay as a seed for palms. The whole desert just blooms. It's also home to the last wild Bactrian camels, to the famous Gobi bear, where I think there are maybe 23 of them left. And the Onega, it has a lot of different names. It's also found in the desert there. Here we have a picture of what the desert looks like with a small camel, just bone dry desert. I traveled with my youngest daughter for 4 days, driving from UB through the Gobi Desert to Hoft. And it was in late summer, and it had been a really good year for rain, so it was quite green. And here you see some of the Bactrian camels common in the desert. These are domesticated, whereas the feral ones are quite deep into the desert. Also, quite a typical landscape there with these tussocks, or what you call it, and just huge areas of nothing. Different shades of gray. But you have like the Mongolian ground jay as one of the birds there, quite a charming bird, and requires really arid areas. Strange looking ground jay that doesn't like to fly very much, but just runs around like the Mi'kmaq, like the great roadrunner in the US, especially. quite a beautiful bird. And when it flies, you see huge white wing patches. A nice bird, and it's almost endemic to Mongolia, even though there are also some birds found in China. Yeah. And toads, my daughter was really fascinated with those. And we managed to get stuck because I saw some birds that I really wanted to see and paid more attention to the birds than to the because it had rained. But luckily, I had some friends who were able to pull me out, and this is what the car looked like afterwards. But this was the reason for being stuck, and it is the first far eastern curlews that I had ever seen in my life. So not too bad after all. We also find some different kinds of lizards here. It's the Mongolian toad-headed lizard. And along the desert lakes, you have bird life without comparison. It turns out that after breeding to both Xinjiang in China, but also to Mongolia, and used the summer along the rivers in the Gobi Desert, here it's a juvenile Silas's fish eagle. And the river, so many fish that you can just take them out with your own hand. And that's what this juvenile Silas's fish eagle is, just living off. Here it's catching a fish called an osm, really quite a nice bird, which is not really common anywhere either. But when there is a lot of grass, you also have livestock coming into the desert, and it can block the roads sometimes. You just need to honk your horn and drive through. You find the gerbils, Mongolian gerbils, and Mongolian larks, which are really nice, big larks, almost the size of a calendar lark, with some white on the back wing, charming birds, really. And we got some kids' balloons. That was kind of nice. And of course, you have the Silas's sandgrasses, amazing birds, and a bird that has been recorded during several invasions more than 100 years ago in Western Europe, but also I think one was in 1991 or something in Shetland. So it's one that could turn up in Western Europe, and it's just really, really common when you find the flying around in the desert. It's really, really amazing. And one of those in the Faroe Islands just made my day, made my year, made my life almost. Quite a beautiful one. And in a desert lake, it's the first record in Mongolia of oyster catcher. Interesting, because it's the national bird on the Faroe Islands. So I was pleased to find that as national. We also found some desert finches in the southwest, there are less than 10 records in Mongolia, but we found at least 9 birds. And here you see some of the socks, also a magnet for migrants. You find the goitered gazelle as well. It's quite common there. And in the Saxel forest, you have the Zeppelin strikes breeding. You have Mongolian. During the night, you can find many different species of jerboas. This is the northern three-toed jerboa, but also Siberian jerboa is quite common. And you have this nice sparrow, the Saxel. It's really not that common in Mongolia. I don't think it's really common anywhere, but we found it there. I'm going to pick up pace a little bit. Harosnur is a lake just half an hour's drive from here, so it's really big. No fishing going on at all. And here you can see the reed beds, 400 square kilometers of reed beds. That's something. And except for grazing, it's just completely untouched. And in this area, you have breeding black-throated divers. You have greater white-fronted goose, tundra bean goose that turns up regularly, thousands of geese. Slideshow just stopped, so just need to go back to make it go again. It doesn't turn now. Sorry. It's going on just to find out how I get back from here. Maybe it got too bored. Do you see the bearded tit now?
Yes.
Yes, great. Yeah, because we also have a snore and a breeding population of Caspian terns. And the last remnants of the eastern population of Dalmatian pelicans there are only a few hundred pairs left seen in China during winter. Unfortunately, they have been quite persecuted in Mongolia because they used the beaks for the horses to scratch off the sweat and so on. So a few hundred pairs left, and I participated in conservation about saving the eastern. Snorre even found the glaucous gull, only the second record for Mongolia. So that was quite something, eating a dead fish, and then saw the first glossy ibis for Mongolia. So they're also quite harsh birds. Greater sandflowers are breeding quite commonly around here, and found gray phalarope, which is also really rare in Mongolia. Long-billed dowitcher is also quite uncommon around here. Here's a nice breeding plumage bird, even though they breed. Pacific golden flowers are common around here. And we have a huge colony of Pallas's gulls, or great black-eyed gulls. It's several hundred pairs, and they're beautiful gulls in the world, I'd say. I think there's one British record in 18-something. And here we have them at point range. Really nice. And an interesting thing is when Siberia starts to freeze, you just see ducks and ducks and ducks. These red-crested flock, 70,000 in one flock. That's quite impressive. That's what you can see in Harosnor. And you also have the really rare relic gull, which breeds in different places as well. Winters in eastern China. And here I got a photograph of fresh juvenile, which almost never has been photographed before. So I also found breeding rosy starlings, only the second breeding record for Mongolia. So that was quite nice. And you also have Mongolian Taiga antelope, just around there. Quite an interesting antelope, really. Spoonbills are really quite common as well, breeding here in good numbers. And Personata, white wagtail, that looks quite different from the Alba and the Yareli. The Terek sandpiper is really nice and common. And white-headed ducks are remarkably common also. Luckily, you wiped out all your ruddy ducks so they don't hybridize with the white-headed ducks of Mongolia. The Leucocephalus, the white-headed yellow wagtails, they're also just really, really quite charming. Broad-billed sandpipers common around here. And even western flavor to the birds around here. And we also have the Coptensis, or Hoft common pheasant. It's really quite along the Hoft River, which unfortunately is being really grazed now. So there are a few spots left, maybe 5 areas left where these pheasants are survival wild pheasants. Really quick to this. Well, the steps. I'm going to just go really quick through this because I want to reach the Taiga forest, which is one of my favorite areas. But the steps, you have the Cinerus vultures, the Siberian wapiti, and you have it's a wild horse species that was saved from extinction and now roams wildly in Mongolia. Really a nice looking horse. And more Mongolian gazelles that you see out in the steppes of Mongolia as well. And now we're at the Taiga forest. 1,000 kilometers of connected forest in Mongolia. So it equals being able to walk from Cornwall to Inverness just inside one forest, which is quite cool. Kilometers north into Russia. And as you can see on this picture here, it's just vast. It's really, really vast. A lot of forest. And you need to do quite some climbing to get. Of course, in the forest, you have a lot of woodpeckers. Here's the gray-headed woodpecker, which is remarkably common. You have the great spotted woodpecker that you find, which is the most common woodpecker. Lesser spotted woodpecker. Tree-toed woodpecker, which is remarkably common. Just last week, when we walked in a forest, we saw 7 of these really, really, really nice birds. Tree-toed woodpecker. It's quite unobtrusive. It likes to forage way down on the trunks and so on, so it's not too easy to find. Black woodpecker is not too easy to see either. It needs really, really old as well. And I was lucky enough to find the great gray owl, actually just outside of the forest. A dream bird that came through, amazing owl, great gray owl. It's one of the most charming birds in the world. Really grumpy, like Miss Bouquet when her last name is pronounced Bucket. And the Tangman hawk owl, which I haven't seen there yet. The Ural owl might be the most common owl in the Taiga forest. with its pitch black eyes. Really a charming bird. And you have the red squirrel, which is not red, but yeah, most of them at least, almost silvery backed. You have the Siberian chipmunks that you only see during summer because they hibernate in winter, but really common in the forest as well, and really nice, charming looking animals. And you have the Siberian flying squirrel, which is in winter they come out to forage, and you can see them during the daytime. And that's just one charming bird. You can see the really big eye, which shows that it's normally nocturnal. Really, really a nice squirrel to observe. Yeah, just some nutcrackers. The slender-billed Siberian nutcrackers are really common in the forest. You have the Palace's rose finches, and especially in March, they gather in large flocks in the forest, and you can see them there. The pine buntings are abundant, and of course the red-flanked bluetails, really nice. Breeding grounds all the way till November. Just one of the most beautiful birds in the world, I think. You have the Siberian thrushes that breed in the forest, the Siberian tits, which are remarkably common in good old Siberian pine forest. You have the common bullfinch. It's much more gray, and you have the Siberian jays as well in Mongolia. Who would have thought? And they're found in quite undisturbed areas, but quite a nice bird as well. Or the ermine in the forest here. It's just caught probably a northern pika. Quite a nice looking bird. And since there's little snow, both the Arctic hare and the ermine hang around, and the snow hasn't come yet. But really quite a charming little fellow, this weasel. And the forests are just so untouched, you wouldn't believe it. The only way to get to huge chunks of the forest, my Mongolian friends, a few years back, and you literally reach areas where no signs of human activity are seen at all. But yeah, you need to go there. Winter, you need to drive size of whales, just impenetrable willows down in the valleys, just going on and on and on and on. And this is the breeding site for the Siberian ruby-throats, for instance. And here you see my Mongolian friend Bollermunk that I just. You have the hazel grouse, which is common around the forest there. This one showed really, really well. Quite a nice bird to come across. Really fresh footprints, but sadly we're not able to track it down because, of course, it runs much faster than we do. But it was really, really fresh with the snow being really. And then we have the gem of the Siberian taiga forest. You can see the droppings here. It's the black-billed capercaillie, and we found a lacking spot where they led due to overexcitement because they just fight and fight and fight until they die from excitement or exhaustion. But we found the black-billed capercaillie is just amazing. Not a lot of people have seen these actually, and not seen them this well. But they live in the Mongolian taiga forest, and normally they're not shy at all. It's quite amazing. Yeah, I'm going to end with some birding around Hoft. I've been volunteering also at a ringing station here, along with two guys, actually both called Anton. The one to the left is from Sweden, the one in the middle from Denmark. And we're ringing a lot of birds, rather young, red-throated thrush, or it's a hybrid. Hard to know, actually. And odd-looking greenfinch and brown accenter and black throat. We had a really good round, Anton and I, because we caught Mugimaki flycatcher and Koslos accenter. Yeah, this is the Mugimaki flycatcher, the easternmost record in Mongolia. Yellow-browed warbler in the same round, and even a willow warbler, which is also really rare here. And I also went once to the southwestern border of Mongolia, where I found this really rare ashy mini-wood, third record for Mongolia. I'm quite a surprise. It normally lives in the rainforests of Thailand and so on, and China. But the area there just has such a European, this is the Copensis bluethroat, it's breeding there. And the Goldsea common nightingale is breeding there, only place in Mongolia. Quite nice to see this eastern common nightingale. European breeders breeding there. And in Hoft, I also found the first record of long-tailed shrike. So that was quite cool. Always nice to find national firsts. And the red-headed ones in Mongolia. And you have these head-edge shrikes. This is probably a Turkestan red-backed shrike hybrid kind of thing. Just makes you go crazy because there are so many weird shrikes. And then I'll end with the really interesting thing, because when we were ringing birds, we caught quite a few nightjars, and the nightjars are quite unresolved. Especially had 2 weeks with no nightjars at all, and then these small nightjars turned up, and they were just looking strange. The wing formula was different, and we had no idea what we were looking at. And if you look at European nightjar and you compare it to the size of the small that we got, which was quite interesting, and especially when you think of this Warris nightjar, that has only been known from one a long time ago. We've taken DNA or feathers from these actually accidentally shed feathers with all the nightjars, so now we're waiting to find out. And initial checks look like we might have maybe 3 different species of nightjars. I'll stop here. Yeah, I heard some noise there.
Hello.
Hello. Silas, if I could just take the opportunity straight away to say that as chairman and host, I was mortified not to be able to welcome and introduce you at the beginning because of microphone problems that are still painfully obvious, but I couldn't let the evening go without saying thank you on behalf of us all. That was a splendid talk. Your commentary was so knowledgeable, your photographs so fabulous. They were really a fitting tribute to Mongolia, which quite clearly is a wilderness on an epic scale that we've rarely seen in any previous talks, and you conveyed that brilliantly. The wildlife variety and your skill with a camera really came over. So thank you very much indeed. I'm sure Steve will have more to add, and I will sign over and out because my microphone is hopeless, and I'm sorry about that. But thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. You're welcome.
Okay, yeah, well, thank you, Silas, and thanks, Nigel. All I can say is wow. But that talk was just mouth-watering. You're going on about flocks of 10,000 little curlews, 50,000 Pallas's sandgrouse, Bakelti like white Siberian black, red-tailed thrushes and the hybrids. It literally is just mouth-watering. It's just such a selection of all the birds, a slight chance that they might turn up on our shores. And then also you got the lovely subspecies, things like seeing the eastern subspecies of the goldfinch with the sort of the brown back with some of the more western, like the yellow wagtail, the white-headed yellow wagtail. It's one of the things that you see in the books, and you just think, wow, I'd love to see one of those. And you're just like living a dream out there. It must just be so exciting for you, because it's going to be just like such an expedition as well, because it's away from the mad, just over the land predominantly, I suppose, aren't you, to some of these places. And it's just such a wild adventure. And I love like the top tips, like Calvin Klein aftershave. We do have some snow leopards in the local zoo in North Wales, so I'm quite tempted to go over there, sneak a little bit in the corner just to see if it responds or not. And then like the lady who was staying with in her tent, and there's snow leopard sort of feeding there, she photographs it with a cell phone. I mean, it's just amazing. And Nigel was saying the photography was like too many to mention, but like some of the ones like Rufus tail rock thrush and white wing red start in flight, where you just captured it perfectly, just amazing. And like sort of brilliant birds, hamsters, gerbils, and the saga. Cap that off with black-billed capercaillie. And now you've got a selection of nightjars, which you must be so excited about. Amazing discovery there. Is there something new that people just aren't aware of? So thank you very much for the talk tonight. It was a pleasure and so enjoyable. So
you're most welcome.
Steve, just a question. Firstly, I mean, so it was absolutely brilliant. Just to re-echo what's been said. I think the was absolutely wonderful. But what I also found actually was your knowledge of actually what's been seen in the UK and Western Europe as well was actually incredible. I mean, you can go down to the pub with, and I'm sure we'd have a wonderful time having a few pints and actually talking about birding, because your knowledge is absolutely tremendous. One of the things that struck me was I think you showed a picture of and up you said it fell to -45. You're 100 degrees variation in temperature. You've spoken about in the Faroes context last week about climatic change. Both those being stretched as well, and what do you see that resulting in?
Well, it's actually a really, really good question, because I didn't want to make this too depressive as well. Just last week, I was in the Hustri there, and it's called the place with the birch trees. And the birch forest has literally just died within the last 10 years. Because Mongolia is feeling probably climate change, because it has a lot of permafrost, where, if you dig a little bit down the soil, it's just frozen pretty much all year round. And that permafrost means that, during summer, it of the trees enough moist to be able to live. And it contains the moist within the soil. But when the permafrost disappears, all of the moist from the soil just evaporates. To be forested simply cannot sustain forest anymore and turn into grassy steppes. And that is really, really visible. And the southern edge of the permafrost is moving north and moving here. So you see the deserts expanding, and you see the grassland expanding north, and you see the southern tip of the Taiga forest moving north, and you see the forest that is connected to the. So it's quite disencouraging in many ways, because it's really obvious that that it's just doing really well, doing really bad. So it is definitely sad what is going on. I could see if I could find a photo for you. Yeah. If I could. Here, let me try to share a screen here. You see my screen now?
Yeah.
Yeah. And do you see this birch forest just completely wiped out? Yeah. And this is because it's an area that used to have the permafrost, but it's just completely, really, really old, big trunks, just completely destroyed. And it has just retreated down to the lowest parts. And now it's almost just completely turning into this with these beautiful birch trees.
And you said that's in about 10 years?
That has happened within 10 years. I talked to my Mongolian friends, and they said 10 years ago, there used to be really dense birch forest with nice, good understory and everything. It's just died off. It's just being dry, so dry, it turns into grassland. And of course, on the southern edge of the grassland, the desert is just getting bigger and bigger.
Terrible.
So that's what, yeah. So here, it's the most obvious that the changes.
Has anyone else got any questions?
How did your Mongolian list compare to your Pharaoh's list?
Good question. Well, I've seen quite a few more species in Mongolia just because there are many more birds here. The further north you get, the fewer species you get, but also the higher numbers. And on the Faroe Islands, you only have like 50 breeding species. In Mongolia, you have like the different nature types. So I really haven't counted my Mongolian list, but it should be around maybe 350, 400 now. And even just last year, we really rare bunting was found breeding in the southeast. So here you really have a feeling of, well, you have no idea what you're gonna find. It's a science, and it's
okay. Right. Has anyone else got any questions that they'd like to ask? Okay.
I was asking Silas a question, but I was muted. I was just wondering how Mongolia looks at birds culturally. You mentioned, losing their beaks for scratching posts for horses or something similar. So there is things like that. But generally, how does the population consider birds culturally?
Generally, whatever flies is not suitable for food. So it's really great. They eat meat. So they don't like fish, which is quite interesting. The Cossacks are actually quite different here, but in general, hunting is very limited for birds, except for they have cock. But they believe that the Altai snowcock has supernatural powers. So if you meat of Altai snowcocks, you can heal from any disease you have. So that one sells for quite a lot of money. So daft. And the pelicans for their beaks. Otherwise, all of the birds are pretty much left alone. And Mongolia is like a safe haven for a lot of the birds. The ducks, for instance, are being hunted heavily to the north and also to the south of Mongolia. But here you don't have any hunting, and you could see with the capercaillies, for instance. First of all, they're not really scared at all, so you can get really close to them. So birds are not for food. Righty-ho.
Okay, well, I think that's probably it then. as we're closing now, if you want to hang on, you might have the chance for a last question or two to Silas. But Silas, for both talks, the Faroes and Mongolia, both incredible talks, two fantastic places, and best of luck with yourself and your family for the rest. Thank you very much. Thanks, Silas.
Thank you.
Thanks, Silas.
Thank you very much.